How does Mormonism, as a historically communal religion, relate to other communal religions? Now, most religions shape a lot more than where you worship on Sunday or what books you read. It actually shapes your physical landscape, especially when there are cities and communities established by groups that share their religion and are led by a religious figure. Just take a brief glance at Utah, and you know that Mormonism has played such a role in that region. Joseph Smith's faith, and Brigham Young's faith after, was a faith that required building cities, and even providing blueprints for what those cities and buildings would look like. For instance, here's Joseph Smith's Plat of Zion, which is one of my favorite images to use in my classes where I teach American religious history to talk about how faith builds out of its context and creates entire worlds. It's focused on urban living, was a rejection and how most religions urged believers to flee cities and embrace nature. It designated the width of the roads and the orientation of homes, showing that prophetic prerogative controlled all aspects of life, and it centered everything around temples. I may do an entire video on Joseph Smith's Plat of Zion at some point in the future because I'm so fascinated by it. And even if Mormonism's control over these types of physical settings ebbed over the ensuing 2 centuries, the legacies are certainly still there. So how Mormonism constructed the world of its followers, especially compared to 5 other religious traditions, is a subject of a brand new book. Martha Bradley Evans's Constructing Space, 6 Communal Religious Groups and Their Spatial Worlds, just out with the University of Utah Press. It's a fascinating and theoretical look at how these 6 communal faiths structure the physical landscape for their believers. It's the topic of today's video. So in this video, I'll introduce the key themes and arguments of the book. I'll then interview the author, Dr. Bradley Evans, and then I'll provide some of my own brief analysis and explain why I think this book is important for others to read. So let's dig in. Dr. Bradley Evans spent much of her career teaching in the University of Utah's School of Architecture, which should give you a hint of the type of questions she's going to bring to this topic and the expertise that she has to share. How do ideas result in structures and this extends beyond mere buildings, but also the physical landscape around them and how people conceive of their place within the world. So this book, Constructing Space, looks at 6 communal religious groups that were rooted in this communal living. We have 3 groups from the 19th century. The Latter-day Saints, as led by Joseph Smith and Brigham Young. The Shakers, the communal group led by Mother Ann Lee, the topic of the recent movie that I did a video on a couple months ago that I strongly recommend. The Oneida Community, which led this communal marriage experiment in upstate New York. And then there's also 3 20th century religious groups. The Branch Davidians, those who followed David Koresh and the ugly and tragic standoff at Waco. Adi Dom, those who followed Franklin Jones, who went by a number of names and established sacred communities in Fiji and California. And then also the FLDS, the Mormon fundamentalists and their settlements in both Short Creek and El Dorado, Texas. Throughout this analysis, Dr. Bradley Evans has a set of clear questions. She wants to know how these groups construct communities, how sacred space is built and practiced, how familial relationships and spaces are made accessible, how violence and gender relate to space, how imagination and sacred theater enliven space, and how these people ordered their built landscapes. Throughout exploring these questions across these groups, Dr. Bradley Evans provides a model to analyze how these organizations, through the concept of cultural landscapes, often looking back to the creation of boundaries and the hierarchy of gender, as well as the threats of violence. And throughout, there's comparisons and comparisons galore, with Mormonism often being one of the 2 sides compared and contrasted against each other. We have a chapter on LDS and FLDS conceptions of sacred landscape, a chapter on the LDS and the Adidam notions of sacralization, either the Adidam sacralization of the individual or the LDS sacralization of the temple. We get LDS and Shaker architecture. We get debates over gender hierarchy as initiated in the Oneida Mansion House versus the LDS and FLDS temples. And we get the threats of violence and the oppression of gender in the Branch Davidians and the FLDS. Just to give you one example of how this analysis looks like, in her chapter on the FLDS and LDS conceptions of sacred landscape, she looks at the original vision of Joseph Smith in the Plat of Zion, which is then interpreted by these various groups over the ensuing 2 centuries. Brigham Young in Salt Lake City, and creating not just Temple Square, but what she emphasizes as Block 88, the square that has the lion and beehive house and the bishop's storehouse, and how those various architectures, as well as their place within the city, oriented notions of authority, and within those homes, especially with the polygamous families, notions of gender. Ideas that then get expanded in different ways in the fundamentalist community, first in Short Creek, but then later at the Yearning for Zion Ranch, the ranch in El Dorado, where Warren Jeffs is eventually going to be taken down due to the raid. Lots of people often talk about the comparisons between Joseph Smith and Brigham Young Mormonism and Warren Jeffs Mormonism. Here is an actual scholarly analysis that shows that yes, there are some cultural through lines, but also vast differences, and we can't converge them together into some, partisan simplistic narrative, but instead we need to unpack them and their worlds, and that knowledge is found through these comparisons, which is one of the really important lessons in this book. Before I go much further, just a reminder that if you enjoy this kind of nerdy context in which we use the historical world to understand our present society, please make sure you are subscribed to this channel. I do deep dives on topics every Monday, I connect the past to the present every Wednesday, and then on Friday I pull back the curtains and talk about the historian's craft, either interviewing authors like I'm doing today on their new books, revisiting classics, or looking at the sources behind historiographical assumptions so that you too can become a historical expert. If you want to give back, and I'm so grateful for the many of you who have chosen to give back, you can become a member, where for a nominal fee you get early access to the videos, you get icons next to your name when you leave comments, and most importantly, you can feel good about supporting public-facing scholarly work, allowing both me and my producer Anthony to spend time putting these videos together. I also recommend subscribing to my free Kit newsletter, where every other week or so I send out a list of links, announcements, updates, my general thoughts, hopefully tying things together that might otherwise get scattered or lost. You can also follow me on my different social media platforms, especially Instagram, and if you'd like TikTok or Facebook, where I do supplemental videos and tie things together that go along with this YouTube channel. Links to all of those are in the video description. With all that said, let's now get back to the topic of the day. Oh, and just to answer the question that many of you might have, you can notice the redecoration my teenage daughter did, my flower child, because she felt that this studio was not lively enough. So if you're enjoying the new flowers, you can thank her. Dr. Martha Bradley Evans is a titan in the field of Mormon history and one of my idols. She started her career at BYU, but then she fled that institution during a lot of the debates between ecclesiastical leaders and academics, things that I've covered in some recent videos. And she migrated up north to University of Utah, where she worked in the School of Architecture and basically earned every degree and held many administrative positions. She was the Dean of the Honors College, Dean of Undergraduate Studies, Senior Associate Vice President of Academic Affairs. She was a recipient of the university's Distinguished Teaching Award, and she is definitely a master teacher, as you'll see in this video. And she also received the 2020 Rosenblatt Prize from the University of Utah, which is the highest honor given to any faculty. And throughout all those many teaching and administrative achievements, she also wrote a number of really influential books, and I'll highlight some of my favorites. Kidnapped from That Land, The Government Raids on the Short Creek Polygamists, a book that I highlighted in a video in recent weeks where I talked about Short Creek and the 1853 raid. She also authored The Four Zinas, Mothers and Daughters on the Frontier, a transgenerational tale of women dealing with polygamy and patriarchy. She wrote Pedestals and Podiums, Utah Women, Religious Authority, and Equal Rights, the definitive history of the equal rights debate within Utah and Mormonism's role. She authored Glorious in Persecution, Joseph Smith, the American Prophet, 1839 to 1844, the third in a trilogy of biographies of Joseph Smith that Signature Books and Smith Pettit put together a number of years ago. And she also authored An Architectural Travel Guide to Utah, a delightful book that really gives you your setting if you travel to Utah. She has been very influential in the public sphere, serving as chair of the Utah Heritage Foundation and vice chair of the Utah State Board of History. And in recognition for all of these many things she's done and others, she received the Mormon History Association's Leonard Arrington Prize for a career of distinguished leadership a number of years ago. She currently serves as a director of the Smith Pettit Foundation, which funds many of the most important initiatives in Mormon history, including the Smith Pettit Lecture at the Mormon History Association and the Sunstone Foundation, and it also helps oversee Signature Books. With all that as background, let's get to the interview with Dr. Bradley Evans. All right, I am now very grateful to be joined by the author of the book, Dr. Martha Bradley Evans. Thank you for joining me. Let's dig into a general approach to the book, which is, why is it so important to understand religious groups, including Mormonism, in conversation with other religious groups?
You know, one of the principles I always taught my architecture students was the concept of juxtaposition, that if you hold up something against something that's very different from it, it makes you understand the first thing better. If you think about the way a building stands up and the sky is behind it, it's actually the sky that makes us aware of the building. Mm-hmm. And I think the same thing is true with religious groups. There are many similarities between these groups, sort of shockingly, because they're actually quite different from each other. But when you hold them up in kind of conversation, as you say, you learn so much more. I mean, the whole point of all of this kind of work is trying to understand religion, the religious impulse better.
Yeah, it reminds me of a common phrase I've heard in the religious studies discipline, which is, if you know one, you know none, right? That it's only in those conversations can points of uniqueness come out. So then why did you choose these 6 religious groups? Because as you said, on the surface, some of them look very different, but under that surface, you can find some commonalities.
Yeah, and you know, part of it was my travels in conjunction with Communal Studies, because the Communal Studies organization has its annual conference in one of these historic sites. And actually, the idea for the book came from the meeting we held at the Oneida Colony. And I was in a room with a panel of descendants of the original members. And the way they talked about each other and their relationships was very spatial. And I thought, oh, there's something here that's worth exploring. So my exposure to those groups, there are many other ones I would have loved to have been able to take on, but I was really committed to the idea of having 3 from the 19th century and 3 from the 20th.
Yeah,
example, have you ever heard of Synanon, the group in California it started as a drug rehab program, but it evolved into a communal religion, and everything in their religion is about circles. They come together in circles, and their most intense experiences are in circles. And I thought it'd be fun to do a chapter about geometric forms.
Yeah, that's fascinating. I'd never heard of them. I've unfortunately only attended one Communal Studies Association meeting in my life. I attended when they held a joint meeting with John Whitmer Historical Association, Kirtland, which was
that one too.
Yeah, so that was fun. Maybe I'll have to make it out, and I'm sure this book is just catnip for those circles. So one of the key concepts in this book to analyze these different groups is what you define as cultural landscapes. What do you mean by that phrase, and why is it such a potent angle through which to view these groups?
It's a wonderful concept, and there's a really interesting body of theory around cultural landscapes. But what a cultural landscape is, or what it describes, is the totality. So, you could fly into Salt Lake City and think the Mormon temple was everything, that's the only thing that the Latter-day Saints were about. But, it's also about the conference center and the ward meeting house. And, it's this continuum that stretches out across the landscape. The other thing about cultural landscapes as a concept is it includes the way people practice the space, or the way people behave in the space and with each other. And I just think it's the best concept to capture the totality. I love that about it.
So let's talk about these spaces, especially in the Latter-day Saint community, which is where a lot of my viewers will be interested. Why is it so important to look at these physical features, the buildings, the landmarks, the city structures, when considering religious worlds? In other words, why do these things matter as much as texts and ideas?
Yeah. Well, they're just another kind of text, right? I think I mentioned in the foreword to my book that I teach a class called City as Text. And this book is based on those concepts, that we need to learn to read the visual language of churches and settlement patterns, because they will expand our understanding of these religious groups. I remember one time when I was in a Shaker town. I don't know if you've ever visited one, but it's very...
Yeah, I visited Hancock Village once, which was...
Well, yeah, okay, so yeah. Hancock Village. When I was walking around Hancock Village, all of a sudden it was like a light bulb moment. Most of these are real subtle light bulb moments, but when I have this kind of experience in these sites, then I go home and I write a chapter about it. Mm-hmm. But everything runs orthogonally, right? Everything runs at parallel lines or at right angles. Even the footpaths that happen kind of accidentally, how people actually walk to work. Everything is lined up that way. Mm-hmm. And that's a really, really compelling example of how order is exemplified in their life, because everything about their lives was ordered. I mean, I think I could argue that about Mormonism as well. But this included the way they slept in their beds, the way they sat at the table for dinner, the way they walked from one building to the other. And I think all these things I recommend in this book that we pay attention to are examples of theological concepts, or things that are so deeply inbred in the members of those groups that they understand what it says, because they help develop that language and they live it. Mm-hmm. I just find that immensely interesting. And, I can't wait to get back to another communal site, because every one of them speaks a kind of a different version on the language.
Yeah. So in the Mormon context, so much of the Mormon communal vision dates all the way back to Joseph Smith, and including his Plat of the City of Zion, which he and others proposed in the early 1830s. But it's also known that, the church eventually moved away from those communal practices. They didn't practice a united order for long, and even though it returned for a bit in Utah, again, it mostly failed. But why do you argue that those legacies are still quite relevant to a church that's become much more individualistic and capitalistic?
Yeah. However, at the core of the practice of a Mormon word are ways people can help each other, right? If you think about the whole Ministry and Angel program, when someone gets sick or has a baby, they're just surrounded by support, meals for weeks. And, there are all of these communal expressions that are kind of built into the practice of being a Latter-day Saint that are still with us. In some ways, I think the Orderville, for example, it's just a technical version of it. But the spirit of communalism is or supporting each other, working together for a common good. That's very much a part of the LDS.
Yeah, still wrestling with those legacies. I mean, those ideas are still found in the LDS scriptures.
Yeah.
And as you would say in the book, the buildings are still around them in Salt Lake City too,
Yeah.
right? So it's very much the landscape that we still buy. And of course, another group that is hearkening back to those same ideas is the FLDS Church.
Right.
And so your inclusion in this book might be, surprising to some readers. It's like, well, you have the Mormonism and then these non-Mormon. Why have a different type of Mormon group? And especially now that many LDS leaders and members are like, oh, we want to emphasize differences between us and them. But why did you find it important to include the FLDS, and what lessons can be learned from digging into the FLDS example?
Right. Well, one topic that runs through all of this, and that's really interesting to me, and you might have thought it when you read it, was some of these groups continued past their communal stage, but most of them did not. For example, the Oneida Colony was in existence for 40 years, and then it essentially became a corporation, and now they produce silver. And, so it became a very different thing. And it wasn't led by the promptings of their prophet, but it was profit, making money. And, the Branch Davidians, we know what happened to the Branch Davidians. Adidam is a community that's still in existence. It was able to persist after the death of their prophet. Their prophet, whose name was Adidam Samraj, really interesting character. He just went by Da. The religion was very much person-centric, so everywhere he sat and led them in meditation, they would paint a D on the landscape, whether on a tree or on a rock. But they were able to persist after his death because he had, in some ways, had anticipated the moment he would be gone. And when you go to the Mountain of Attention in the north part of the Napa Valley, he had put photos of himself, really beautiful, elaborate photos of him at all the key ritual places, so that even when he in his person wasn't there, they would continue the same practice. But in the Mormons, we became something else, through the history. But we persist, and we're stronger, and we're an important American religion because of that. The FLDS are a really important case in this book for me, because they're what I would call an example of core diffusion. So they take the core elements, and these are visual, social, some of them are theological with them, but create a slightly different version of it in a different place. But I think that shows the power of the original idea for it to be, so strong that, if you go down to Colorado City, you can see their ancestry. It has a grid. The fact they eventually built a big meeting house, that was, they were just doing what the Mormons had done before. Mm-hmm. So it's a really strong idea that's expressed visually once they build there. And I just find that really interesting. Why do some groups persist and some just go away?
Yeah. So one final general question, Dr. Bradley Evans. What do you hope readers will take from this book after they pick it up and read through these 6 groups? What do you hope is one of the big lessons that they'll take away from it?
Oh, this is the teacher in me, right? But I hope that when they go out into the world, they just do it with wide open eyes, and they start noticing things that have just, been gliding past them, because the world is so much more rich than we recognize. And there's so much more going on around us than we really pay attention to. And especially when you go visit a religious site, you just have to think about every single thing you see and every move and how people are interacting with each other or with you. And it's a richness that we just need to reach out and take advantage of.
Great. Excellent. Thank you so much for spending a few minutes with me and for unpacking this brilliant book.
Thank you, Ben. I appreciate your inviting me. Thank you.
My thanks to Dr. Bradley Evans again for spending some time with me and answering questions about her book. And I hope that whet your appetite to go read it, because I really enjoyed the book and I think it's a great primer for those who are interested in this topic. So before I get to what I loved about the book, I'll say a few, they're not warnings or reservations, but things to take note diving in. One, it's very interested in theory. So there's lots of references to theorists, their theories, and other scholars. But as I'll note in a bit, she introduces them in a very readable way so that you can actually understand them. So just know, you're going to learn what secularization and landscape means, and that's a good thing. It can also be, note, because it's jumping back and forth between these different traditions across these chapters, sometimes it can be a bit repetitive. You get introduced to Mormonism at various moments, but they're necessary in order to understand the broader context. And finally, while there are some gorgeous photos taken by the author, especially of the Shaker places in the chapter on the Shakers, I wish there were a bit more maps in order to visually conceive, but I know there are constraints on presses and things like that. And as I'll note at the end of the video, there are other sources you can go if you want to actually see the visual stuff that is theorized in this volume. So with those quibbles aside, here's why I think this book is great. Reading through it, you can tell why Dr. Bradley Evans is an award-winning teacher. She is taking you by the hand to understand these 6 different traditions, their comparisons, and what lessons we can take. She is walking us through these theories and why they can add color to our lives. She introduces these 6 groups in a very neutral and fair way, and the comparisons are quite enlightening. For instance, I really enjoyed the chapter on the gender hierarchies of the Oneida Mansion House as compared to the LDS and FLDS temples, how those ideas of gender as an idea is then instituted, inaugurated into practice, including in their sacred places. And I was also, troubled by the chapter on the branch Davidians in the FLDS due to the lessons that we still haven't really learned of these internal dynamics that created these us versus them boundaries that are then misunderstood by authorities outside those traditions, which cause conflicts. In other words, while I was familiar with most of the religious traditions discussed in this book, I still learned a lot, both through the comparisons and the introductions of new theoretical literature, which is why I thought this book is very worthwhile. Religion structures the world around us, even if you're not religious or even if you're not part of the religion that is the predominant culture in your setting. And so getting the tools to unpack what those structures mean and how that society operates is so crucial, which is why I really enjoyed this book, Constructing Space, and I strongly recommend it. If you then, after reading this book, want to go further, here's a couple of recommendations of especially looking at the maps and the creation of the Spatial Zion in Mormonism. Richard Canviglia's The Map Makers of a New Zion, or Brandon Plew, S. Kent Brown, Donald Cannon, and Richard Jackson's Mapping Mormonism, an Atlas of Latter-day Saint History, are rich pictorial histories that then can be tied with the theoretical arguments found in Bradley Evans's book. I hope you go check out the book. I hope you found this video useful. If so, hit the like button and share it with friends. There is also a link in the video description to Dr. Bradley Evans's book that you should go pick up. History has never been more relevant than it is today because it helps us make sense of the physical landscape around us and these worlds that we might otherwise just take for granted.